All right, we're continuing our examination of the subject of rejection, and in this study we're going to look at self-rejection. And self-rejection occurs when you accept rejection as being a correct assessment of your acceptability, your worth, and your value. So in a sense, you continue to replay the rejection beliefs that you now hold as being your truth. Now, in a ministry setting, you will hear self-rejection statements overflowing from the heart out of people's mouths, and these will give you strong insights into beliefs that people hold. And it's extremely common for those who have rejection issues to also have either fear of rejection and self-rejection issues. In fact, it's, as I say, very common that they'll all be there together. So as they share their story or problem, you may hear and note such statements as, "I'm just not good enough, I'm stupid, useless, a loser, hopeless, ugly, such an idiot, I never do anything right, I'm not as good as others, I'm a bad person," and so on. So they're sharing their story, and what I normally do is I have a piece of paper there, and as I hear these things, I just jot it down as we go and realise that we need to come back to that. So I was in the UK studying many years ago, and I befriended a very cultured Englishman named James, and towards the end of our studies, this was back in the 90s, he asked me a question, and he said, "Are you always so sardonic?" And I responded, "I don't know, Charles, what on earth does sardonic mean?" As I now understand it, it means laughingly mocking or being derisive, and in this context, he actually meant towards myself. In other words, as I was making jokes, they were at my own expense. I was kidding around about my shortcomings, and it was something that actually reflected some inner issues that I later had to deal with. But at that time, I decided that if God had accepted me, then he was more likely to be right than I was, so I needed to stop rejecting myself. That dealt with my mind in regards to my behaviour in repentance, but later my heart was healed as well. It certainly showed something that was deeper. So this criticism of self as an inward expression would normally be accompanied from people by criticism of others because of the low self-image that it proceeds from. So false humility can come under this banner as well, with an attitude and presentation based around, well, I'm just no one and nothing, I'm not worth noticing, don't worry about me. Now, this is not humility, this is low self-image. You can, in fact, be quite confident, but still aware that in comparison to God, you're just a created being. So humility is actually a healthy perspective of your humanity and acceptance of your weaknesses, imperfections and limitations, but you're still okay and you're still just like everybody else. You have your God-given strengths and weaknesses just like everyone else. You're neither greater nor lesser, you're simply you. All right, another thing that we'll typically see with self-rejection is self-accusation, possibly self-condemnation, and even self-bitterness. So when self-rejection is extreme, it can at times extend to self-hatred because of your perceived unacceptability and inadequacy. Some Christian commentators even consider this to be the root of autoimmune disease. So in the heart, the belief is that you're not enough, you're a failure, you're not what you should be. This, through your shortcomings, makes you the enemy of your own acceptability. Now, your immune system, its role is destroying the enemies of your well-being, which in this case has been inwardly decided to be you. If you don't like you, then you're now the enemy. So spiritually and emotionally, you're against yourself because of what you believe about yourself in your heart, or the thoughts and feelings coming from your centre or middle. Now, the experts tell us that the immune system will then attack the weakest link in the chain, often being the organ that's most under load. Now, this could be our stress system, such as our thyroid or adrenal glands or other bodily organs. Commonly today in Western society, our pancreas is very much under load because of overeating, and that makes them the weakest link, and we could develop diabetes in an autoimmune sense where our body attacks itself. So the bad diet then is only creating an environment for the disease to be established and to prosper. And at times we see people who are very obese and they have no diabetes, and others are only slightly overweight and they contract the disease. So this could be kind of a physical indicator, a strong indicator of how prolific the self-rejection issue is today, projecting out of not being accepted in the home or the breakdown of the family unit. Where self-rejection exists, fruits such as guilt and self-condemnation will also often be present. Guilt relates to believing that you've done something that you should not have done, or perhaps more likely in this situation, guilt believes that you've not done something that you should have. So the guilt, we would say, is connected to believing that you've fallen short, and self-rejection comes via the mechanism of believing that you should do or be more than you are, and so you've failed. A number of years ago, a man came to me presenting with diabetes, and I asked him if he carried a fear of rejection, self-rejection and guilt. And he thought about it for a while and he reported, yes, that's true, I do. And so we did some truth encounter sessions over the next few weeks, dealing with memories containing guilt that produced anxiety and self-rejection beliefs. Now, at the conclusion of the ministry times, I'd pray for his healing as well. And after each session, he would report that when tested, his blood sugar levels came down 2 points. So we did this until he was in the normal range. Now, I would not suggest that we make this the guideline or how it will always be for ministering to diabetics, as it was an isolated case. However, we did target these emotions deliberately because there are ministries which consider diabetes to be rooted in the specific emotional dynamics of anxiety connected to rejection, fear of rejection, self-rejection, self-hatred, guilt, and even at times depression. Now, if you have all those things, you're probably going to be feeling depressed. So we can readily see how this ties together. Depression often comes from hopelessness about ever being able to perform well enough to be accepted, even for yourself to accept yourself. As a result, you're constantly anxious and fearful about being rejected for not being or doing enough. Now, you then reject yourself for being a failure and feel guilty about not pleasing others or achieving their standards. So to minister to these belief-based negative emotions, the question is not so much do you have fear of rejection or self-rejection and guilt, as it is to why do you feel guilty and what do you believe that has led you to reject yourself? I recall another lady who came in for ministry at one time with another autoimmune disease called multiple sclerosis. She was quite slim and she'd been a fitness instructor, and as we went through the preliminary workup session explaining truth encounters, I commented to her that if she'd been overweight, she may have had diabetes instead. And she related back to me that her sister was overweight and she did in fact have diabetes. Now, they both grew up in the same family environment and most probably held the same or similar rejection beliefs inside. All right, well, let's look at some outward signs of self-rejection, and we've just discussed some potential inner workings of self-rejection, but there are also some very obvious outward manifestations that may be encountered at times. The first one would be self-punishment for not being acceptable or not accepting yourself. It could be present in behaviour such as cutting or children banging their heads against the wall or hitting themselves. So this self-punishment is a sure sign that they're angry and frustrated with themselves. Adults might try to self-destruct with alcohol or drug abuse. Others try to comfort themselves with food and can at times set up a self-destructive cycle. Now that they're overweight, they consider themselves to be even less acceptable by the standards set up by modern media. Still others may go the other way with excessive gym work or excessive exercise or dieting to try to make themselves better and good enough. Some may have other performance and success-based goals such as career, or if they become wealthy enough, something like this. Now these can also be to do with receiving love and acceptance, significance, value and worth from a performance-based world, which is for the most part rejective in its fallen nature. All right, so the next thing we would look at is these people very often cannot or will not receive encouragement. We've already mentioned self-pity. Well, many people cannot receive affirmation. The inner rejection belief regarding their unworthiness is like a force field that cannot accept any encouragement as being true. For some, self-pity is a kind of distorted good feeling, which is a kind of demonic counterfeit for love. Often people suffering from self-rejection will present as negative, pessimistic, and they're unable to receive because of unbelief. Now, the underlying, probably unconscious belief is something such as, if I reject me, surely you must too. All right, the next thing that we will find is negative self-image and comparison. So commonly, self-rejection proceeds from memories and events where a person has been compared to perhaps a sibling or another student, and as a consequence, he's ended up feeling like he or she is inferior. Now, if this is the case, then you will find that they still have a problem with comparison in order to rate their acceptability even today. Now, the truth is that God does not mass produce humanity as we do cell phones or cars or something. That with cell phones, maybe you can have a black one or a silver one, but otherwise they're exactly the same. For us, each one of us is an individual. We're a one-of-a-kind masterpiece that God created for himself to spend eternity with. He didn't make any other ones. In 2 Corinthians, actually, we see, but they measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves are not wise. The reason for that is once we've received healing from beliefs stemming from comparison, it's not wise to compare ourselves with others, because we'll either decide that we're better and be swollen up in pride, or we'll decide that we are lesser and enter into even more inferiority and self-rejection. So it's wise to take the counsel of Scripture and not compare ourselves with others. Of course, we need healing, as I said, from the beliefs stemming from comparison to begin with. So we just accept that you're an awesome individual creation that cannot be compared to others. Obviously, the inner beliefs need to be dealt with, but we can know that there are no other versions of you in existence. There's none found in history back in the past, 100, 200, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and there's none planned for the future. We can thank God and praise him as King David did for making you. And that's not pride, it's acceptance of yourself and who God created you to be. You are the work of his hands. After all, you did not create yourself. And we see in Psalm 139, King David understood this well, and he said, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. So he's acknowledging God's work of creation in him. He's saying, marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. He's still talking about himself. He says, my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed. So King David is acknowledging God's skill and the fact that God oversaw the whole process, making him absolutely what he wanted him to be. And he goes on to point out that God continues to watch over every detail of our lives. So we've talked about being created, and now we're talking about our lives. And he says, goes on in the passage to say, and in your book they were all written, the days for me, when as yet there were none of them. How precious are your thoughts to me, O God, how great is the sum of them. So even all of our days were fashioned for us, and he's watching over each one of them. All right. We'll keep clipping along. The next thing that we struggle with is what we would call a distorted self-image. So self-rejection produces a distorted self-image. It can be like a belief-based demonic hedge stopping people from receiving themselves, receiving love, receiving acceptance and belonging. It can cause people to reframe things that are said to them according to the inner beliefs that are held in their hearts. So somebody might come along with some genuinely motivated suggestions for doing task some other way, or improving something that you're doing, and a friend or a spouse or an employer might say something like that. So they might think that your work's fantastic, but they might say, you know, even if you just did a little of this or a little of that, they're thinking it would be even more amazing. But those beliefs, because of the self-rejection beliefs, are now reframed and perceived as an attack on your competency and worth. So, for example, my wife and I have ministered to many pretty girls who believe that they're quite ugly and unacceptable. And this often begins as a child, when they perhaps had a skin rash or something, and possibly somebody made fun of them or said something unkind to them at school. And now they come to this conclusion that their appearance isn't acceptable. Maybe they had a little bit of childhood chubbiness or something like that. The point is that the belief that they took to heart has now distorted their image of themselves, and consequently they now reject themselves. Now, I actually, when I was teaching one time, I mentioned this phenomenon, and along with some other problems that apply to this area. And there was a pretty young girl just a few rows back, and she suddenly burst into tears and had to go out and receive ministry. Now, I wasn't sure exactly what I'd said that produced that, but I later found out that she had an incorrect self-belief about her looks, and that was the cause of the outburst. So it doesn't make sense to our rational mind, but the beliefs we have about ourselves tend to reframe how we see ourselves and how we see what people communicate to us and how we think they see us. All right, let's look at some self-rejection symptoms. So the first one is low self-image. Rejection crushes the personality, and inside we think, well, if they think that I'm hopeless and useless and so on, then I must be. Then the next thing is, proceeding from the depths of this low self-evaluation comes a sense of inadequacy and insecurity. Beliefs such as, I'm not good enough, I don't feel safe to just come out and just be me. And then following along from that, we would see sadness, grief, sorrow. These are outward signs of a wounded or crushed spirit. The evidence is, if you like, of deep hurt. Many people have what I would call a tragic look on their faces, and I'm sure you see them from time to time, which is the result of this. And Proverbs 17:23 says, a cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. So when we're crushed in our person, as I say, we've had that loss of acceptance and love and acceptability, then that sense of loss will produce sadness and even grief and sorrow. All right, the next one is self-accusation and self-condemnation. And this is where they're not able to forgive themselves, and they take all of the blame for the rejection. They constantly put themselves down, and as we've said, they cannot receive praise or encouragement. Many will punish themselves for the way that they perceive that they are. Underneath, there's an inner dialogue going on that's producing the attitudes to themselves and this emotional turmoil, and it's thoughts such as, I will never get any better, I will never be good enough. Once again, we see Proverbs 18 verse 14, it says, the spirit of man will sustain him in sickness, but who can bear a broken spirit? So this weight on us, the constant weight of being broken on the inside. All right, the last few, the next one is worry, anxiety, or depression. So these beliefs are, I don't know what to do to resolve this. I can't cope. What will happen if I don't fix it? This is all behind worry and anxiety, some areas of worry and anxiety. The next one is frustration and anger, and often this is directed at not being able to achieve standards or goals or expectations, whether they're real or perceived. These things that relate to qualifying you to receive acceptance, love, significance, value, and worth, which is something everybody needs. So you'll also probably find present with that negativity, pessimism, or hopelessness, proceeding from a belief that things cannot be changed and expectations will not be met. You'll often also find inner self-talk that could be along the lines of, I'm too useless, it's hopeless, I just can't do it. And then finally, an inability or refusal to communicate. This could be in the form of what some people call sulking or packing a sad or being in a huff, that sort of thing. And the underlying idea behind the behaviour is probably retaliation for how the subject is being made to feel, but it can also be a plan to cut off the source of rejection, so they refuse to communicate. All right, so as we wrap up this session, let's do a sample ministry to rejection beliefs type scenario. So a person approaches you for help, and the first step is to explain the process to the person and what you're looking for, namely the heart beliefs. And this process could include having them to read, view or listen to material explaining the ministry. And you'll find these resources on the 418 Centre website if you need them. Step 2, the person comes for the actual ministry session now that they understand what the problem is and what they need. And take note that they already have the problem that they're struggling with, so you don't need to come up with anything. You don't need to be directive. It's not your job to fix their whole life. You're just there to try to help them with whatever is presenting at the time. And so you listen to their story and the issue that they're bringing to you. You make notes of the things that they say that may be clues to what they believe. And as I said before, writing things down is good, as it means you don't miss things that may need to be visited, and you don't need to interrupt their story. And believe me, the Holy Spirit will you'll just know that thing that they said is important, and you'll write that down. All right, the third step is, let's look at a ministry example of, say, fear of rejection beliefs. And we'll call our man Fred again. So he's come in, he's got fear of rejection about a situation. So Fred says, well, I felt very uneasy when I went to try out for the church choir. And so I would say to him, well, why do you think that you were uncomfortable in that setting? And Fred thinks about it and he goes, well, I think that I felt that I didn't belong there. I was not part of it. So this could indicate a possible belief such as I'm not wanted or I'm not accepted, or there's some reason why he doesn't feel like he's a part of it. And so then we have him concentrate on that feeling, which is a bad feeling produced by the thought that they don't belong or they're not part of it and rejected by the group. So we're looking for the earliest possible historical place where they learnt the beliefs that caused them to feel this way, and inevitably heart beliefs about your identity will be before you're 10 years old. All right, so Fred then says, I've just remembered my first day of school. There was a group of kids playing and talking together and they ignored me. And so I say to Fred, well, as you concentrate on the memory and you feel that rejected feeling, why do you think they ignored you? So Fred would then perhaps pause and explore the memory. So we're happy silence is okay while this happens. And then he says, I think it's because I'm not like them. I'm new, and so they don't want me. This is what felt true to him. He says, this must be true because they're all accepting each other, but I'm on the outside. In fact, I feel like I'm different. I believe that I'm different, not like them. Okay, so now we can say, well, let's keep it really simple, Fred. Let's ask the Lord what his truth is, the real truth. And we might say something like, Lord, what do you want Fred to understand about that time where he felt that he was not wanted because he's not like them, because he's new, and he's different. He's different in a negative way. And this is what we would call a qualifying statement. So in other words, he must be different and unacceptable, and the qualifying statement will be because they're not accepting him into the group. Okay, so now we've presented the belief to the Lord, and Fred might respond. He's been listening for what God's saying to him while he's feeling that feeling. And he says, well, the Lord's reminding me that these kids went to kindergarten together and they already knew each other. And I couldn't get into kinder because they were full up. And so I would say, so are you not wanted because you are different? And Fred thinks for a moment, thinking about what God's saying to him, and he says, no, I'm the same. I've just not built relationships yet. So he's realising truth. Later, I did make some good friends there, and I am different, but in a good way. In fact, I'm unique. Okay, so now I say, well, okay, Fred, how do you feel about the church choir now? And he thinks about it, he says, well, I feel excited about it now. I will be making some new friends. It'll just take a little bit of time. And I have my unique person to bring to the group. It's as simple as that. And we've seen this thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of times over several decades. Then I would perhaps close in prayer, thanking the Lord for his healing, or I might inquire as to whether or not there are other things that are troubling Fred and that might need ministry. All right, so now clearly this example is not going to be as deeply painful as rejection often is, but some people have very painful traumatic rejection situations from some kind of abuse or absence of love in the home that run very deep and can be quite emotional. Other people may have what we would call a profile of rejection, which is composed of a lot of less painful beliefs. So you're visiting different memories and there's different beliefs, but they're all to do with rejection. All right, that's the close of Unit 6. We're going to move on to Unit 7 soon, where we'll be learning how to deal with fear or fears of different kinds. And we'll discuss that in detail later on. So I hope you'll stay with us as we learn how God will set us free, but also how to minister to others.